Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Green. I'm going to be moderating this session. And welcome to Getting Beyond Business as Usual, Paving the Way for Social Progress. Let me give you a few housekeeping announcements first, that you, please, do not switch off your cell phones. But do please put them on silent. And you are urged to tweet away with the hashtag that you will see there, hashtag SkollWF. And let me assure you, you are being listened to. We have a team of people here at the front who will be monitoring the hashtag, looking for your comments and feedback, and working with us to integrate that into the conversation. That especially goes to you wonderful people who are watching online. Welcome to you as well. And that's a reminder to everyone in the audience, if you be careful, the world is watching you, mind what you say, be very careful. What else I'll tell you? When we come to you, wait for the microphone before speaking. It's always polite to introduce yourself to the rest of the world. And then finally, please, feedback is always welcome. So please fill in your session evaluation so the Skoll World Forum can go from great to even greater next year. Good. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fantastic panel with us here today. A panel who are here speaking as brilliant individuals, not on behalf of their institutions. We have from the far end, Mike Porter from Harvard Business School. Alexis Bonnell, who has not only the best boots in the business, but also the best business card. I think you describe yourself as a chief evangelist, innovation evangelist at USAID, but speaking personally, of course. Marcela Manubens, who is speaking for herself, but also works at Unilever, which if you're talking about social good in the world and business, within a minute, you're always talking about Unilever. Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation, who is driving a whole agenda around inequality and inclusive capitalism at the Ford Foundation, which is all about changing business as usual. So really excited about that. And finally, if you have any problems at all, you have to speak to Astrid Scholz, because her job description is Chief Everything Officer. So anything you like, talk to Astrid. Ladies and gentlemen, the way this panel is framed around a question. And that question is, if we really cared about the outcomes in our field, in the field of improving the world socially and environmentally, how would we organise ourselves as institutions to actually drive those outcomes forward in the fastest way? I didn't ask that question. Mike Porter asked that question last year in a session just like this. So in a sense, today's discussion is a continuation of that discussion. I think many of us in this room are frustrated. We're frustrated with incremental change. We really want to see big, systematic change, because we will not get to the world that we want just on incremental change and business as usual. So the question is, what's got to change to get that large-scale transformation in our world? Mike put the question. That's why we invited him back to come and answer it. But what I want to do, the first thing I want this panel to do is not to talk, but to listen. I want them to listen to you, because you are the social innovators. You are the people on the front line, at the sharp end, trying to drive change. You're the ones who are running up against obstacles and challenges as we try to build a better world. So we want to open this session not with the panel talking, but with the panel listening to you. So, over to you. We want quick, crisp, crunchy ideas. What has got to change to flip the system and get beyond business as usual? Who's in? I see a hand. Please. And please wait for the microphone. Right here.
Thank you very much. My name is Cécile Laborde. I'm a professor of political theory at University College London, and I'm also on the steering committee of the International Panel for Social Progress. One thought I had about the question that Michael Green just asked was, how do we think about scaling up and generalizing the existing successes in the social entrepreneurial world, and how important is scholarly knowledge, academic knowledge, in order to help us understanding the broader contextual, long-term, comparative context in which social progress is possible, but also is sometimes made difficult by structural obstacles. If I may, can I just draw your attention to the work that we're doing at the International Panel of Social Progress. This is a panel that's made up of 300 academics from around the world. We're now currently working on a report that will be published next year on the state of social progress around the world, and we very much welcome feedback from all stakeholders, including and primarily social entrepreneurs like yourself. So please be in touch, but I'd like to know more about how the panel thinks that there should be synergy between the academic world and social entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you. So ideas, knowledge, thinking is crucial. Please, right down here as well. If you're somewhere in the back in the middle, please wave vigorously. There's a very blinding light in my eye. And I've got a couple up here, so we'll come to you. Please.
Yes, hi. My name is Diane. I'm from Montreal, and I'm an impact reporter. So I work with the traditional media, and my challenge is to get my bosses to care about my subjects and my readers to care about social progress as much as they care about their investment or their GDP growth. And that's quite a challenge.
Great. So the media, ideas, attention. Let's grab one at the front and then we'll come to the back.
Bruno Giussani from TED. I think that we should just change the title and instead of getting beyond business as usual, call it getting beyond shareholder value, paving the way for social progress, and that's what we need to do.
Okay, get beyond shareholder value. Right, we're at the back left, there was...
Hi, I'm Janet Longmore, founder of Digital Opportunity Trust. Two things. One, every business in the world needs to be a social business. Secondly, we need to listen to the people who live daily. They have fierce compassion because they're living the challenges of poverty, of homelessness, violence against women daily. We do not listen well enough, and we need to build their skills to be social innovators.
Fantastic. Right, who else do we have there? Right at the back there? Or have you got one here? Has someone got a microphone? Yes, then we'll go to the back. Then we'll go to the far back row after that.
Thank you. Bill Clapp, Seattle International Foundation. And, the biggest road bump we always run into is the local governments and working with the governments, and how do you figure out how to build the institutions necessary to carry out the work.
Cool, this is great. I was worried that business was getting too much of a beating, but now government's being given a beating. That's excellent. Excellent. You right at the back there, sir.
Hey, Jim Fruchterman from Benetech. I think that we should use technology to capture the voices of the communities that we really care about, and then connect that to actually serving their needs, and then throw off data, ethically, to actually connect that to some of the bigger things, the SDGs, the SPI, and the like. So I think the tech community should really rise to that occasion and use tech, not for better advertising, but for good.
Fantastic. Right, how are we doing over here? Well, where I see a hand. There's a little forest on the right-hand side over here.
Hi, Mara Bolas from Oxfam. One thing that McKinsey, Oxfam, and Forbes magazine all agree on is that women are the best idea in the world. So, I think with that consensus, I'd like to talk about how we're putting women at the center of the solutions.
Excellent. You got an idea how to do that?
Of course. Let's talk later.
Hi, Tim Billing from the Skoll Global Threats Fund. I think public opinion is the big flywheel to keep some of these efforts going in a sustainable way. So how do we more effectively change public opinion, especially countering the misinformation that is out there?
Fantastic. Right, down the front here, and we've got a couple here. And then we'll come here. And if you keep waving, okay, we've got a little stream over here, and I'll come to you next.
Good morning, Arthur Wood from Total Impact Capital. We often talk about innovation at these events, but how do we capture the value that drives normal capitalism, the values of collaboration and economies of scale? First question. And second question, how do we ensure the social sector as a stakeholder gets an equitable win-win with the corporate sector in terms of that engagement?
Fantastic. Right here, and then we'll come over that side and come along.
Last year, when Professor Porter put this question to the audience, the other point was that this is a very deep issue in the social sector, and I think there are plenty of solutions in the social sector, but the fact that the whole sector is kind of on the side and subject to these systems of philanthropy and development that fragment efforts, I think that has to change.
We're subject to the systems of philanthropy, Darren. You'll have to speak to that one. Right, let's go to the here, and then next to you as well.
J.B. Schramm with New Profit. There's a crisis of purpose among youth, and how do we remove or fix the structures that are leading to that?
So youth, and there's one next to you, and then we'll come on over here.
Hi, Dom Llewellyn from Numbers for Good. Really interested in how corporates can use finance as a way of aligning financial incentives, social impact, through looking at incubation, venture funds, etc.
Cool, and then in the middle here.
Hi, hello? Yeah, Nick Hanauer. I'm a technology entrepreneur and venture capitalist. So disruptive innovation is always a consequence of game-changing or frame-changing strategies. And for as long as we accept the idea that if and when we have growth, we will include people in it for moral reasons, we will lose, and we will not be able to get beyond business as usual. The trick is to get the public to realize that including people turns out to be the fundamental technical mechanism that actually creates growth in market economies. And if you can get public sentiment there, then you're on the downhill slope.
Cool. Thank you very much. Look, I think we've done about 15 minutes now, so we'll take a pause now and go to the panel to come back, but we'll come back to you, definitely. Yeah? Can I just check, is there anything online that we need to feed back in the conversation now, or shall I go to the panel? Cool. Excellent. Well, look, Mike, you asked for it. You asked the question. You've heard a whole great bunch of ideas coming through. I mean, take your pick. Tell us what you think is the big thing that's got to change, get beyond business as usual, get to real world-changing scale.
Really? I have to answer that? Well, first of all, I just want to say how much fun it is for me to be here as a HBS guy. The energy, the incredible commitment that everybody in this room has to actually making things better in many dimensions is incredibly refreshing to me. And although I think we have a lot of challenges, I think we have a lot of things going for us now that probably 20 or 30 years ago we didn't. So just a little bit of perspective. The awareness, the commitment, the degree of engagement, and the passion about social progress are higher today than any time in my life. Younger people, not so young people, older people, I think everybody understands these issues, cares about them. The problem is not the will or the desire, the problem is structure. It's mechanisms to deal with something incredibly very complicated. We've had a number of comments about business. I think that business is in what I believe is a historic transformation in rethinking this issue. We were very taken last year that we got Fortune magazine that does all the big lists, the Fortune 500, the companies that you most want to work for. Fortune magazine did a new list last year, and it was a list about companies changing the world. It was a list about companies that were using their businesses and thinking differently about the role of business and actually in driving social change, not on the side, but integral to actually creating those markets and serving those markets that one of the commenters just referred to. So I think there's a lot of things that we should be happy about. That said, I think we all agree that we're not getting the progress, the impact, and particularly the scaling and large-scale impact that we would like to see. And I believe, and of course I'm a partisan here, I believe that probably the number one starting point for changing that is measurement. We have to have a way of systematically measuring how we're doing in social progress. And to do that, we have to have a framework for thinking about what is social progress? What are its multiple dimensions? Right now we have this very inchoate field where there's all these individual discrete little topics and everybody's moving sort of in their own way towards dealing with this issue or that issue or this issue or that issue. We have no standard industrial classification here. You know, in business, you kind of know this is a bank, this is a manufacturer of toothpaste. We have a way of sort of mapping the problem that industry is meant to solve, which is producing goods and services. In this field, we haven't had a systematic framework for actually measuring how well we're doing in a holistic way across the social sector. We have no unifying sort of framework for even classifying the social sector. And therefore, that leads to some of the other problems we see. But we even have no way of describing how many people are working on this, how many people are working on this, how many people have achieved this, how many people have achieved that. So that measurement would be number one, and something that we are, of course, passionate about in the Social Progress Index as an attempt to really do this. If we have measurement, then we can start to compare. What we're seeing with our social progress work is we can identify which countries at which levels of development are actually good at various dimensions of social progress. So we're having a meeting in Iceland here in a few weeks. It's called What Works? And with the measurement framework, we're able to see that actually Nepal is really stunningly good at maternal mortality. And compared to other countries in its economic peer group. And we can see that Rwanda is stunningly good at child mortality. And if we measure, and if we have a systematic way of measuring, I think we can now start to learn much more rapidly. This is a field where the ability to learn and compare has been stunted by the lack of measurement. And then the final thing I would say, and this is a big topic in and of itself, is that we have to start recognizing that we are often at too small or too narrow a unit of analysis or unit of effort in social progress. We tend to look at one part of a problem or one dimension or one aspect, but we don't tend to look at the system. So public education is a perfect example. Public education is hundreds of NGOs or hundreds of social organizations doing hundreds of different things. But they won't work unless they work in the context of the broader system in which we know we have to move a lot of things at the same time to achieve success. Another example would be agriculture in Africa. You know, we spent billions of dollars for dozens and dozens and dozens of years, and agriculture in Africa isn't getting better very, very fast. And what we've done is we've done individual point solutions. We've had people working with farmers. We've had people working on issues of fertilizer. We've had this issue and that issue. But what we're starting to realize, if we're going to benefit the agriculture in Africa, we're going to have to see it as a system. We need the supply chain. We need to get those products to market. We need to equip the farmers with better capability. We need to put in place technology for irrigation. There's 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 different things that all have to happen collectively if the work is going to be successful. So I think this idea of collective impact that Mark Kramer, my longtime co-author, has written about is critical. We have to stop looking at individual solutions, and we have to start thinking about what's the system in which this area is embedded. If we're going to get progress, we have to move the system. To move the system, we have to collaborate across topics, across entities, even across institutions like government and business. So those would just be 3 things. But this is we could talk about this the whole meeting.
We'll keep doing it over beers. Right?
Over beers.
So I always like to joke and say, have no fear, the government's here. That's all It's all going to be handled. And for those of you who will tweet this question, you get them on eBay. They're $17 and they come in 13 shades. So now that the important things are out of the way as far as what I will tell you today, I think it's a really, I mean, to draw on the time of, and the points made about systems and structures, this is a really interesting time for us to reflect on what is the business that we're in, right? In the modern age, when I look at aid and I look at these large development structures, what is the business that we're actually in? What are the synergies? And there are two things that I think I've taken over my journey in the last couple of years that are really, really powerful to me. One is this idea of just democratization, right? And to be honest, I was in a lot of industries before coming to development. And I've never actually been in an industry that functions as elitistly as development does, in the sense of who gets to solve the problem, who's at the table. And I think one of the really neat things that we've done in harnessing and going after innovation is this recognition that solvers can come from anywhere. I think one of the things that we really are excited about at USAID is the fact that 50% of our Grand Challenge winners are local. And that just makes sense, right? Because people know what their problems are. And oftentimes they know what their solution is. I have a running joke that, should we put this money in intervention or should we give them an unlimited supply of duct tape, right? And which would be more effective, And honestly, I think that idea of empowerment, but the interesting element, I think, of the moment we're in right now is we're all kind of getting comfortable with that idea. Well, that the Argentinian car mechanic can solve breech birth, and that the wedding dress designer can have a role in the new personal protective equipment, around Ebola. What we're less comfortable with is actually what the average person's role is. And what I mean by that is what we're finding is we are funding innovators who in some cases might be a brilliant scientist or academic or engineer. They're bad business people. And then it fails, right? And we wonder what didn't work. And so all of a sudden, I'm starting to realize that, my uncle, the accountant, has just as much to offer, Africa as I do, right? If he can help that entity get their books in order, then actually puts them in, even more the right place to be powerful. So one of the questions I think we have to ask ourselves is, what is the business we're in, and where and when do we have to get out of the way, right? When can our new generations have, and different people really leverage skill sets that are quite universal, and yet we really haven't appreciated as development actors. The second thing, and I think this is the one that gets me most excited, and to be honest, should be really scary to us, and it's something that keeps me up at night. And that is, right now, there is a woman in a village with a cell phone. And if she had our mission director's number or our ambassador's number, she could text him and say, or her, and say, I don't want this programming that you're doing. I want X. That upends the entirety of our industry's structure, right? Our industry is completely made of many players, right? And the idea that all of a sudden I can take a beneficiary and switch them into being a customer should be a startling piece of information, and it should scare us to question our relevance, right? And question our model and where we play and how we should be playing. And it's making us look at USAID and recognizing, gee, we gave money, but that wasn't enough. It didn't get to scale. What's happening? Interestingly, the other element we see a lot of is this focus on data. And one plea that I would have, which all the people who love the word data will hate, stop calling it data. Call it business intelligence, right? Because data, it doesn't mean anything to anyone. But when I talk to a colleague at AID and I say, oh, what's your data on that? They're kind of like, oh, there's data somewhere, right? There's measurement, there's evidence. Yet when you say, well, what's your business intelligence? It's like, well, of course we have business intelligence. Of course we're making these decisions. So I think part of what we have to think about is how we frame and how we accept this new dawn of the empowered customer, and being brave enough to say, what is that really going to mean for our institutions, our structures, our mechanisms, our bureaucracies, in order to live in this day and age?
Cool.
Wow. Well, good morning. Two very difficult acts to follow, but really excited about being with you today. The thoughts of Michael, you talk about a problem with the structure. You talk about collective impact, and you talk about measuring. What it gets measured gets done. Alexis, you talk about democratization. Oh, how wonderful. I often talk about the democratization. And even thinking about what technology has done and what technology plus education plus is an equalizer, of where we want to go. So that was brilliant. The cross-training, I mean, what do we need to learn from each other? In general, we come together as collaboration, and probably at the premise of what you were trying to do, Michael, is what do we have to learn from each other? And then we talk about this idea of technology and the middle players, right? If you think about how we are structured, we always, whether much of the things that we put in place hasn't until now reached that end, consumer, if you would, the person that we are most interested. So I will build a little bit about that, because that were some of the issues I wanted to tell you today. Well, I have been asked to talk about myself, but Unilever story. So Unilever, very large organization. You may have some of the statistics, 172,000 people around the world. We have close to 60 billion, turnover. We have operations in 190 countries, 76,000 suppliers. Within that, we have a reach of 28 million, but we don't, to Michael's point, I mean, it's really 28 million, 30 million. So we have a very significant, what all this says, we have a very significant footprint. So back here, I came to the company 3 years ago because of our fearless leader, Paul Polman, some of you know him, who has really tried to really impact and drive transformational change. And at the core of that transformational change is what we call the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. Just to put it very simply, is the premise of that plan is that we don't need to sacrifice the environment or social, but we need to put it together. And it's at the core of what it was. John Elkington once talked about triple bottom line. Michael Porter talks about share value. It's this idea that in order to run business, and we strongly believe that the future will be for those companies that put this formula together. And the USLP was launched in 2010 around three big ambitions. One was health and well-being. The other was around environmental footprint. And the third one, that is really social, is about enhancing livelihoods. Now, 3 years into it, in 2013, we reflected on that. That's when I came on. And we look into the social element, and we said, well, there are opportunities that is at the core of many of the questions that you have. There were gaps that we needed to address. And we relaunched, and we created 3 pillars. One of them was fairness in the workplace. It's all about human rights and labor rights. I mean, you cannot have really a sustainable business moving forward if you don't have a strong foundation. The second pillar was called out early on today. It was opportunity for women, women's empowerment. I mean, Kofi answered it very eloquently, Oxfam and all the comments that we had before. If there's no most powerful tool for development than women's empowerment. Why? Because the statistics, as Michael mentioned it, are there. I mean, women invest 90% of what they make into the communities, their families, projects that really impact their communities and their societies. And we talk about that virtuous circle. And the third pillar is about inclusive business. And what we wanted to do that, I mean, we have done work before, and we are engaged with certainly many of you in doing this, is to address the vulnerable communities and that they were core to our business. Smallholder farmers. And you look into, informed by the World Bank and many of the studies, you know that when you look into the chain, the agriculture chain, the ones who are at the beginning and certainly the most impactful are the ones who do not have the share of the economic growth that they generate. And most significantly, there is an opportunity to really make their business more impactful and sustainable. We talk about smaller scale retailers. It's the way that we reach other communities that otherwise wouldn't be there. And it's about upskilling. And it's an issue that we need to talk, and certainly is at the core of of that social transformation that we see and youth entrepreneurship. But for those who may know me, I started many years ago one of the first programs in human rights and social responsibility in the fashion industry. This was in the early 90s, 1991. So the questions that in preparation for today that I was asking myself is, have I seen progress? Definitely. Have I measured progress? Absolutely. Have I seen eradication of endemic problems? Not really. I mean, as a matter of fact, the problems that we dealt in the 90s are sort of masqueraded, you may call it, transformed into different problems. Have I seen systemic change? There are elements, there is progress, but I have seen the seeds, but I haven't seen the transformation. And the example of that, if you look into, in that industry, Bangladesh, the industry was really built up in the late 80s. Many of the issues of safety were addressed. But then in 2013, you have Rana Plaza. So the question for me was, why? And it goes at the core of what Alexis and Michael says. In my opinion, I'm going to throw it to you, and I would like to see your reaction. This post-World War II social contract is broken. It's not really working. When you think about the social contract at that point in time, the post-war, government and capital, business and labor came together to really, around the problem, rebuild a continent and basically the world. And there was a lot of, and actually, we have many stories to draw from of how it worked at that moment in time. But let us test this. I mean, governments were charged with the protect. Whether it was security, whether it was generating or promoting employment or growth or issues of the future, like pension plans. They were charged with issues like that. The business were the engine for that growth to rebuild economically a region. And then you have labor, and labor now, in post, Universal Declaration of Human Rights and ILO, a strong convention on freedom of association and collective bargaining, we're at the table with really much, in equal terms, certainly much more than at the beginning of the century. If I'll ask you to reflect in where we are right now, one of the premises that I'm putting forward is that we are privatizing many of the functions and the roles that historically that post-World War II social contract put in the government. If you think about health and well-being, I just explained to you some of the things that we do. We are undertaking health and well-being. It's linked to our business, but we are doing much. We are doing a hand-washing campaign in India and worldwide. We are addressing issues of sanity. We are addressing issues of women's safety, right? We are addressing human rights. We are feeling, in the construct of the UNGP, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, government protect, companies, business respect, and then we joined in remedy. There is, I argue with John Ruggie, that there is a great area where, government is not protecting, so where do business do? We need to step into that space. So the point that I'm making, and if you allow me, I want to turn a little bit to you, is that we are going to be able to move the needle, but we are not going to really resolve and transform in the way that we want. Everybody who is here has been devoting a new effort to really transform, but we are not going to see the systemic change that we want to see if we don't have that premise. So I want to turn 1 second, maybe 2 stories that is in the top of your mind that you would like, because I heard talking about local governments was one of the questions that they have. Right? We talk about local solutions. Really, do I need, or even in our field, do I really need to have an auditor to train to go to a community to tell me something, or do I use Alexis' model? Yeah. People putting in social media information. True, I need to validate, but if the cost of measuring a program is more expensive than doing, what are we doing? And do we need to measure? Maybe we need to measure. I mean, is the tail that walks the dog. But the question is how we can make it all work. So,
yeah.
Yes, carry me out.
I want to give everyone a chance, but do you want to close?
So my closing point, I wanted just not to have the closing, but to ask a question of one of you. What would it be? Are you working in these issues? Is one of you can tell one story of this social contract that you think it has some of the components, that needs to be reshaped, and what is the way forward? How do we engage with everybody that we need to engage, government, business, civil society, and labor, to really bring that reformulation and recalibration.
Excellent. So we'll hold that question. People have got solutions around defining that social contract. We're coming back to you. We're looking for an answer. Darren.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. It's a great honor and to be here with all of my colleagues from Ford. A number of really interesting and provocative things. So, Michael, yes, it is true. We are both delighted and in some ways gratified by the progress that we have made, but we are also very frustrated. And we are frustrated, your diagnosis I agree with. We are frustrated in part because there is not the sort of systematic way of measuring progress. I would say that part of the challenge is, in some ways, and here we are at the Skoll Forum, and here I am going to say it, and it is that we have exalted the individual entrepreneur. And we have in many ways privileged the idea of the hero social entrepreneur, and we have disadvantaged the importance and primacy of institutions. And so I think part of the challenge is that we have got to understand that both individual initiative and entrepreneurial spirit is essential, but so are institutions. And so we have to calibrate our investments accordingly. Certainly, I can speak for Ford, and I appreciate the question about the ways in which philanthropy distorts the behavior and the system to, in many ways, deliver bad outcomes. Mm-hmm. And I certainly, on behalf of my institution, take responsibility for contributing to that. So we are today really, I think, taking a hard look at what I call the 3 I's, investing in individuals, institutions, and ideas. But it's really important that we, as a philanthropy, have some level of skepticism about many of the ideas that come in, because there is this, on the one hand, desire to continue to seed innovation. But every day someone comes into the Ford Foundation and says, I've got this idea, I want to do fill in the blank. My response often is, who asked you to do that? Like, why do we need that? Is that because you wrote a paper on it at school and you decided that after school you wanted to start an NGO and go to Africa and save a village? Now, on the one hand, you want to encourage that kind of spirit. But on the other hand, in some ways, it contributes to the very diagnosis that Professor Porter has put forward, that we have to take seriously. And so I worry about our doing harm by over-investing in good ideas that actually can't be scaled or are already being executed quite well in the next village. And so, so one of the things that we have to get better at in philanthropy is being honest and interrogating our own practices in this respect. So what I would say what I would say in addition is that one of the reasons we haven't made as much progress as we would like is because the very systems and structures that we seek to transform themselves are set up in many ways to reinforce the inequality that are within systems, right? And so the very structures that we need to disrupt, in many cases, serve the advantaged and serve to reinforce the disadvantage of others. And so it's why we have to also be comfortable talking about power and recognizing that people have to be mobilized, and we have to invest in movements and the mobilization of people to disrupt those systems and structures. And that's not always easy to do, and we don't always do it well, even when we want to do it. And finally, I will say, women matter. We know women matter. But why is it so hard? One of the real drivers of inequality are cultural narratives and practices that affirm why some people are in their station in life and others are in other stations in life. And wherever we are in the world, we see it. Why is it in India that in polite society it is acceptable to talk about certain caste people and where they are in society? That in polite company, you are allowed to do that. Why is it that we have a narrative in the United States that in some ways reinforces the idea that the fact that so many black men are locked up is because they're more likely to be criminals?
Yeah.
That's a narrative. Why is it that we have narratives that say women really aren't good in science? Women don't want to be fill in the blank. That's really not, well, we have that because we have cultural narratives. And unless we're willing to embrace the power of culture as a barrier to progress, it's really hard to imagine how we're going to see the transformation that I think Professor Porter spoke so eloquently of.
Thank you.
Well done.
All right.
All right.
Astrid.
So I am a Gen X recovering nonprofit executive turned tech entrepreneur. And the reason I'm called Chief Everything Officer is because in a startup you really do everything, I've come to learn, including scheduling my own appointments. I no longer have an executive assistant, and that has wreaked havoc with my life. Over the course of my career, I have published academic articles. I have navigated the government procurement process in the pursuit of social change. Once wrote Alexis Bonnell a letter telling her why we wouldn't respond to an RFP. We have sought and found shared value with corporations in the implementation of projects and initiatives. And yes, I have danced the dance of deception with foundation officers, where people like Darren are the most handsome, smartest, most interesting people in the world.
Did you get it?
I'm all of those things, I know. I became all of those things 2 years and 13 days ago.
You know of which I speak then. And the time is now, what I haven't been is a tech entrepreneur. And the reason I'm a tech entrepreneur, the reason I first disrupted myself before pursuing a sort of disruptive frame, I think, as Nick called it, is that without pulling yourself out of the social change industry, it's really difficult to help it change. And the disruptive mindset that we're after, the changing mind frame we're adopting in our company is one of abundance. We're not scarcity, this phony baloney competition that the foundation world puts us through, where I have to pretend that my organization is better than your organization. But what if we start from a perspective of abundance, of solutions, of ingenuity, of creativity, wherever it might reside, and then think about harnessing that abundance to accelerate the pace of social change? That's the question a few of us began asking ourselves a few years ago. And what that does is, from a perspective of the sector then, is to say, our problem is not that we don't have enough resources, ideas, money, and time. Our problem is how we harness the things that already exist, how we overcome the fragmentation of our industry, to Paula's point, right? And so when you do that, you realize that we have a lot to learn from other industries. And I was trained as an economist, so I will offend some people in this room when I say the social change industry is an industry. And it is an industry that exists because markets and governments fail to provide us with all the things we need to live well, right? If markets and governments were functioning perfectly, we would need philanthropy and charities and NGOs, etc.
That's true.
As an industry, it suffers from a horrendous business model inefficiency. I'm just putting on my wonkish hat, right?
Yeah.
We work in isolation. This behavior between NGOs and foundations is basically one that in the academy we would call information asymmetries and rent-seeking, right? This lack of, we're oriented towards the funders instead of towards our customers, the people we're here to serve. I take comfort from the fact that every industry in the history of humanity that has exhibited these sorts of characteristics has been disrupted. So this industry will be disrupted. And to Alexis, to your point, it's already happened.
Yes.
We're already obsolete, right? Some organizations are trying to stay ahead of that inevitable pivot and change. And those are the organizations, some of which we've had the good fortune of working with. So one of our partners, and in fact founders, if you will, is the Rockefeller Foundation, a 100-some-year-old organization that says we need to change the way we do philanthropy and see the benefit of harnessing technology to help facilitate that. And this is not to say that, oh, geez, there's an app for that. But there is opportunity to essentially bring the peer economy to the social change industry, to facilitate some of this disintermediation, facilitate new behaviors, create new feedback loops, create transparency, create an infrastructure for metrics and measurement, and so on and so forth. And so that's the endeavor some of us are now engaged in. And I will say that it is interesting now, being in the tech world, a woman in tech. There's a tired meme, but I have to carry that burden, where investors don't get this. It's really interesting. So there's a role in this room for people who have that sort of capacity to play a very interesting role, because investors we talk to are looking for mythical creatures. They're fascinated with unicorns, right? Our operating company is named after the largest living organism on Earth, Armillaria. Look it up. It's a fungus. It's very disruptive in its ecosystem. It's our mascot. And that's sort of the guiding ambition here, to now figure out, can we put tech for good not just into the frontline application, to Jim's point, but can we harness tech for the good of the entire industry? And we're not asking for permission. I'm not going to write another grant proposal in my life. We're, just to quote a famous ad man in my adopted hometown of Portland, Oregon, just do it. Right? We can make this market, we can change behavior by just doing it. Looking forward to your questions.
Cool, just do it. Fantastic, thank you all. Yeah, I want to come back to you in a minute, and I think one of the things I want to ask you in the audience is, what's missing or what's wrong? Had some clapping, great, more clapping, more noise. Fierce compassion is the theme of the forum, so fierce participation should be the mode for the panels. But are there things you're disagreeing with? We'll come back to you in one moment. I just wanted Mike, you've worked across every different sector. You see how this stuff fits together. From what you've heard, this thing about the social contract. How do we rewrite that social contract? How do we change institutions fundamentally? I mean, you've got this perspective that no one else has. Help us.
Oh my God. Well, I'm going to make, I'm not going to answer that directly, but I'm going to make a number of points that hopefully build on what has already been said. I think, as we look at our social progress index, and we've tried to comprehensively measure many, many aspects of social change and social good, where the world has failed the most. The way we construct our measures is we look at the best ever achieved and the worst we've ever seen on various social indicators, and we go from 0 to 100, and then you can kind of on an absolute level see how far you are along. If you're 50, you're half as good as the best you can imagine. If you're 75, you're 75% as good as the best can imagine. And the area where we're the worst is in what we call opportunity. And let me just read you some of those things, because it's come up over and over again. Personal rights. We're horrible in the world at allowing personal rights to exist. Personal freedom of choice. We're horrible in the world creating a structure, and this is all a lot of institutions coming together where people can actually decide what they want to do, given their interest. Tolerance and inclusion. We fail in the world at actually allowing people to be able to, live their life. And so I think that this notion of social contract that's come up, which Again, I'm a sort of geeky economist, so I'm not quite 100% sure what that is, but the gestalt of that is that a lot of what we have to accomplish here is simply to allow individuals at all levels in every part of society the kind of basic capacity to make their own choices and better their own circumstances and have the power to do that. It's interesting that all this measurement that we've been doing of social progress has identified that as the weakest element. And I think that's quite powerful given many of the things that have been said on the panel. And I think how do we learn how to do that, I think becomes really critical. And that's where we're stuck with a lot of other institutions in society and a lot of historical cultural artifacts that we inherit. So I think a very important point. I very much like the idea that we have a social change industry. I like that way of thinking about the problem. We have a social change industry that is highly fragmented and has a poor business model, has been said, and is fractured in the sense that even the entities in the industry that should be actually collaborating and working together and scaling to achieve impact, that's not happening for a variety of reasons. So I think that's a very powerful idea. And I think we need to mount a systematic, rigorous study of that industry in that way. I think the more we think about social change and social entrepreneur, we get into Darren's sort of celebration of the individualism and the entrepreneur and the story and the hero. But the more we kind of see what we do collectively as an industry that's trying to deliver value to a customer, and we sort of start looking at ourselves through that lens, I think a lot of other ideas that some of which have come up will emerge. And then I do agree that and I said this before. I think the other fundamental problem that we have is the ability to realize that almost anything that we really care about is going to require a series of improvements that cut across multiple dimensions. And it's almost inevitable that other institutions in society have to be involved in that process. So how do we actually mount efforts that truly engage government and business and social enterprises, a variety of sorts, in some kind of a collaborative and collective way? I think that's the hardest problem of all. The nature of the issues that we're looking at, I mean, if you're trying to figure out how do I make a railroad locomotive, I mean, that's a pretty easy issue. It's a complicated beast and lots of parts, and you got to put the parts together, and you got to have a marketing department, and you got to figure out how railroads want to buy, and you have to figure out how many hills the train has to go up. That's a really hard problem, but it's a very doable problem. How to get break down the multifaceted problems that are holding us back in public education, that's a much harder problem. And it requires us to cut across more institutional boundaries and pull together many more skill sets. So at one level, I think before we get too depressed, we should realize what we're doing here is inherently harder than what most other institutions have to do. Therefore, it's no surprise that we've got a sort of a screwed up industry at this point that could be better. Because we're groping and flailing away at how do we do this? And we're afflicted by this kind of problem of fragmentation in scale and lack of a capital market that kind of works efficiently and a customer model that we can follow. But that said, I think we have to realize that that is what this aim of ours, to create social progress, this is what this aim of ours, this is the challenge it inflicts on us. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna. I think we need now to start a whole new vector in this field, which is absolutely around these issues. I think the colleague earlier that talked about a group of scholars coming together. I think this is a field of study that we need to launch and take just as seriously as we do studying so many other fields. It's funny, we're very good at studying medical science, but we haven't done much serious study of how do you actually get medical science to actually be delivered to help people, in the field, that's the challenge that this industry collectively faces, problem by problem. Education, inclusion, nutrition, environmental issues, problem by problem, we are facing the need to kind of cross institutional boundaries and have more systemic views of what the problem is. So again, I found myself here raising the question again and again without providing the answer. But I think some really powerful parts of that answer have already come up.
Can I just on this point say, I think that, and I'm very proud that the Ford Foundation is an investor in SPI, and I think it is an amazing, amazing achievement. And I think it's important that the research be connected to action. And that, I mean, the reason we invest in that is because we need evidence, but evidence alone, as we have learned, is insufficient for transformation. And so we've got to have that connected to the people who actually are most impacted by the data, because those data actually are very powerful and in fact reinforce, affirm what if you talk to people on the ground, they will tell you. And so how do we connect the movements, the people on the front lines with the evidence to take to the structures and systems and use that for disruption? That's what's important ultimately, I think. That's the way we're going to get there.
That's great. Let me just come quickly back to the audience. There was a most fierce flagging over here. And then we've got a strong cluster in this corner. And then we've got a bit here. And then keep waving at me.
Darren and Michael, Alicia Douglas with CASA, you're absolutely right. But I think with what needs to happen is the weaving with storytelling. Storytelling is key of not just how data becomes relevant, but how it becomes the legs and, or I like to say the hands and feet of being able to do that. So Just Films with the Ford Foundation is a vehicle. So we also have so many different people in here when it comes to media. So it's education, it's understanding with what that underlying storytelling piece is on how we start moving systematic change, in my opinion.
Thank you. I think that media point's come up in public opinion a few times. I think if the panel's got a reflection on that, that'd be great. Let me also give the panel a warning. As we come back, I just want to really finish off with your ideas on, and I saw a great documentary on the BBC recently about the Obama presidency, and I saw, I think it's his Selma speech. He talks about the beauty of the word we. And so I'm not going to ask you what am I going to go away and do about this. I want to say, what have we got to go away and do about this as an action point? So it's a warning to the panel. I'm going to come back to you on that one. And then we're in this corner. Who's got the microphone?
Bill Ackman here on behalf of the Pershing Square Foundation. So I began my life believing business was about making money and philanthropy was about doing good. And 10 years into the life of the foundation, I actually believe that really sort of the elephant in the room is philanthropic solutions to problems, not-for-profit solutions to problems, are inherently problematic. And if you look at what's changed, and I think technology has driven a lot of this, I think the biggest impact we can have on solving social problems will come from capitalism, as frightening as it is for some people in this room, and also for-profit solutions. And why? Because there is a willingness on the part of investors to defer the receipt of profit. Think of Facebook, think of Amazon, and think of Tesla. I think these are three companies that had an enormous impact on the world in a very positive way. We can talk about it. But that would not exist if there were not a profit incentive and a traditional capitalistic design to their business models. Elon Musk, it's going to be many, many years before he generates profit, but he'll have more impact on the environment, on job creation, et cetera. So I guess my thought is, every time someone pitches me on a philanthropic solution to the problem, I say, where is the for-profit solution? And I think technology has enabled many more for-profit solutions, whether it's the Android phone, wireless access, et cetera. So I think foundations fundamentally, I think I agree with Astrid, I think that should be thinking about how to put themselves out of business, and how do we help design a capitalist system that gets us, I would spend philanthropic resources pushing the capitalistic system to get there, because you're not going to get there in an organization that requires constant funding. I just don't think it exists.
Yeah, that is great.
Can I just say on this point, I think it's really important, and my friend Bill Ackman, I too am, as you know, a fervent capitalist. But there are some ways in which the capital markets fail to serve. And I say that as a capitalist. And so to my mind, it is what's the best and highest use of those philanthropic dollars to meet those failures. And so one could say that in the United States that our capital markets served, let's just use African Americans seeking mortgages. Well, it served them, but in many ways it was a disservice, because we know about predatory lending and some of the practices that happened. And so I think we have to use our and philanthropic dollars, in my mind, are not. The ideas for philanthropic dollars are investments in civil society solutions. At least that's how I see it. So from my standpoint, when a philanthropic dollar is invested, it's hopefully invested in a very high potential idea brought to us by some NGO leader, some brilliant academic, we are an investor. And so I would never want it to be perceived, and I think you're right, it is perceived by many that philanthropies are solving the problem. We don't solve problems in philanthropy. We fund the people who solve problems.
Okay, I think there's a whole other panel discussion that we could have on this.
Yes.
But I want to
on Friday.
And you will on Friday.
On Friday.
But I want to really flag this up. I think there's something we said earlier about shareholder value, about the social purpose of business. And it's like, what is the role of capital? What are the priorities of capital? And how does that fit in with ideas like shared value? So maybe Mike and Marcela, I'm putting you on warning that maybe help us out on this when we come back at the end. There was down behind there, and then I had we'll take a trip over here to make a little cluster in this corner. And with Martin afterwards, please.
Hi, I'm Ani Patton, and I work for the Bertha Center for Social Innovation down in South Africa. My question is for Darren and for Alexis. Can a broken system be trusted to fix itself?
No. Why are you asking them? I mean, seriously.
I think the rest of you are probably doing it, so I'm just asking them.
No, I wrote an essay called "The New Gospel of Wealth," where I talked about a 21st century gospel that builds on Andrew Carnegie's 19th century gospel, and one of the challenges that I state in it is that the people who are privileged and the institutions who are privileged are in fact seated with the need to self-correct, right, and with the responsibility of self-correction, which is really hard. And so for me, leading a privileged institution, what that has meant is I've had to interrogate our own practices, and as I did that, I actually found that we weren't aligned, that there was asymmetry in the way we have relationships with vendors, our hiring practices, our investment policies, our board recruitment. They're just things that we have to really interrogate.
And if I can quickly respond, I think the reality is if we don't change, then we deserve to be irrelevant. Right? And I think one of the hardest things that we often look at, it's very easy for us to have these academic conversations of scale, and we all need to work on scale. But at the end of the day, an investor said something really interesting to us. We have a large portfolio of innovations that we're really proud of supporting. And that investor said, well, here's a water innovation that you have, and then you have $1 billion of traditional water programming. If you're not using your innovation in your water programming, why on earth would I invest in it, right? Would I support it? And so I think in the idea of change and culture and power and all these things, the number one thing I think our team is doing is going inside and saying, how do we get what we've invested in used, right? How do we get our technical experts comfortable with tech? How are we, and it's not very sexy, but how are we getting rid of, elements of procurement or legal structures or things that are inhibiting or hard to work with? And so I think sometimes what we have to do when we talk about scale is look inside and say what's broken and what's our little role, right, in the ecosystem we play in to make it better. And if we can't do that, then we deserve our irrelevancy. But I think we're on there.
Panel, if I can ask you to hold on to your brilliance, and what we're going to do is have a quick run through, get the perspective of the audience back in, and then we'll come back to you. Martin, and then we've got a gentleman there with the glasses.
I'm Martin Bert from Fundación Paraguaya. I think that what we are seeing with the Panama Papers is the same movie that we saw with FIFA. Is the same movie that we are seeing in Brazil. Technology is playing a fundamental role in changing the whole system, Uber, Airbnb. So the opportunity that we have here is immense in creating these frameworks to measure and classify, but let's not repeat GNP of the 21st century, a GNP measure. Let's take advantage of technology to allow the people in the bottom to upload their information, what their social progress is. And I think that we can do that, and that is something that we as a community can do. So it's, let's not rely only on top-down indexes, but combine it with information from the bottom and technology that can really allow us to be a we. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Michael?
That's perfect.
Michael?
And then over here, please. And then to the gentleman. Oh, you got a microphone.
Michael, I want you to answer one comment to that.
Can we come out? I want to get the people in just very quickly.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then you, sir. Yeah, please.
Joe Kavanagh from Australia. I hold two roles. One is as CEO of a community service organisation, and the other is as an adjunct professor at a university to do exactly what you're talking about, joining up knowledge into practice, but also research in practice so that the university becomes embedded in the organisation, so that we're facilitating the engagement with the people who are the beneficiaries. So I was very grateful that Professor Porter mentioned collective impact. So we would see ourselves as becoming experienced practitioners of collective impact. But can I throw to the panel, one of the challenges that we now see is that this framework for enabling people to collaborate and measure and share the agenda is now being hijacked by the systems. The people with the power to make the decisions and the money become less humble about their own knowledge base and assume that they know what collective impact looks like in practice, which includes permission to fail and learn from your failures. So in the system fixing itself, I'm still not sure how you're weaving in that the system holding itself honest and ensuring that those kind of opportunities to connect between knowledge to practice and beneficiaries is the how we work rather than so much about what we're doing, it's how we're doing it to get the kind of transformational change that we need.
Super. Thank you. If you could pass the microphone to the gentleman in front of you there and the gentleman with the microphone there.
My name is Simon Bell. I work for the World Bank. Just 2 points. On measurement, I think one of the most powerful things we did in the World Bank was the Doing Business Indicators, which were a set of indicators that inspired a lot of people to try and change their business environments. I think the two lessons I learned from that is, one, it was incredibly controversial, and I think we have to be prepared to accept controversy, to actually make things happen and embrace controversy. I think the other thing too is there has to be a narrative about what's in this for me, and the narrative for governments around that story was that if you didn't get this right, you weren't going to get investment, you weren't going to get growth, you weren't going to get jobs. So we need around the Social Progress Index, we need to have a narrative about what's in it for the people who actually affect the change, and I think that's very, very important. Secondly, I work in the area of finance, and I think one of the areas where we've scaled up amazingly is in things like digital banking in Africa, and we have 18 million people, Kenya has 18 million people. Tanzania next door has close to 20 million people who are involved in digital finance. This is affecting real change. But why does the stuff stop at borders? It's the original point you made. We see points of lights all around the world that stop at a border. Why don't they jump these borders and go further? So we talked about M-Pesa for 15 years. If it was such a great example, why wasn't everybody doing it? And then just the last point, to come back to the effect of the private sector, M-Pesa is now spawning all sorts of industries which affect village electrification, microfinance loans on a telephone, all sorts of fabulous things that I think we can crowd the private sector into to actually providing those tasks. There's a lot of SMEs around the world that can employ people, that can create jobs, and do things viably in a capitalistic manner that actually can deliver development that last mile. And this is what we have to bring these two things together.
Cool. Then there's a final one here.
I'm a bit of a Darren Walker groupie, so maybe I've drunk the Kool-Aid.
You're the star.
Andrea Armeni from Transform Finance. I would like to challenge a little bit the title of this panel, because this is sounding to me a lot like business as usual, after all. It's not really getting beyond business as usual. We've been talking about part of that co-design with communities, which still seems to be extractive in many ways of the knowledge that communities have created in ways that are then turned into a profit-making kind of machine. We haven't talked much about sharing the governance or even sharing the ownership of these resources and really making sure that we're changing a little bit the entire premise of profit maximization. There are other ways that are being developed, in part by the impact investing community, bringing in a social justice lens, taking, as was said before, a very thoughtful approach to the power dynamics that go into this and trying to see if we can subvert those. So getting these communities involved in even defining what counts as impact for them. You know, what would they like to see as interventions and not just as recipients or a new wave of consumers. So it would be great if we could address that.
Cool. Thank you very much. Look, what you don't know is that Skoll Foundation are very tough on their moderators. Every minute we overrun, they're going to cut off one of my toes. I'm sorry for those who didn't get a chance to get in, but there's just so many ideas that we want to pull and wrap up and give the panel a chance to reflect on this great discussion. And I love the fact the premise of the panel was challenged. Astrid, do you want to just give us your closing thought?
In direct response to Andrea, actually, the how we do this together is by co-creating a different kind of system. And you just do it. I mean, with respect, you know, do we need another academic study of it, or do we just start acting differently? Do not accept foundations that ask you for 0% overhead proposals. You know, do not engage under the current terms of reference, if you will. To the point about technology, you know, what we need to create is sort of the eBay meets GitHub meets Yelp of social change, to create some of these new feedback systems and feedback loops. You can't do this change just on top of Facebook. You know, that revenue model is ad eyeballs. It's not a revenue model that is designed to grow social impact and social change. So it takes an active, purposeful act of co-creation with each other, where we all play our parts and do it in an agile development framework, hopefully, responding to users.
We're going to co-create with Astrid. Fantastic. And I could say we are all doing already. Great.
We are, right?
Darren.
I think what you said is great, Astrid. And I would only say that for institutions like large foundations, we need to be better listeners. We need to develop more muscles for humility. And we need to understand that knowledge that is rooted in the lived experience is highly valuable, and that we don't always privilege the knowledge that may be the credentialed knowledge over that knowledge.
Good. Okay, I would like to, in response to what we were talking today early on, the point that you make that it was so important, new models, shared economy, technology. I think that what I realized, if you had that, you had these new models, we are still siloing in the issue. For instance, I haven't heard anybody really addressing issues of human rights and labor rights in a shared economy, particularly in Uber. There are significant issues going on right now. And if you think about how we have set it up, even UN guiding principles, etc., to look into that, that goes out the window once that we have those models. So we, one of the most significant issues to articulate, what Astrid in action, what you said, just do it. We need to look into that, and we need to make sure that we embed it to prevent those unintended consequences. The other issue I wanted to highlight is that many times we gather around the problem as opposed to addressing the root causes. For instance, right now, given there's a lot of attention put in modern slavery or forced labor and their eradication. And at the core of that is the movement of people, migrant labor, moving because of political crisis, economic crisis, environmental crisis, social issues. Now, is it really addressing a systemic change by addressing the eradication of modern slavery, or do we need to really look into the generation? Why is it happening? And at the core of that is the principle that Robert Solow had presented. Actually, there is a very good article yesterday of inequality. I mean, it's not a good business for business like ours, for capitalism. Inequality, poverty doesn't work, because we really need to ensure that value distribution really is done in a more equitable manner, so we can have that virtuous growth. And in terms of the approach that we have, let us not have the Band-Aid approach, but let us have really what it was said before, of working on these solutions together. What would it take to prevent something that the Rana Plaza in Bangladesh? What would it take? What would that business model, when you are creating an industry in a given country, is happening in Myanmar, will happen in Cuba, it happened in Bangladesh in the 80s. What would it be the actors that need to be there, as opposed to for all of us to, stakeholders to connect later on?
Cool.
Yeah, I would just say that, in response to a lot of what was said, we have an appetite for change. Yeah. We have an enormous appetite for synergy. And I believe everyone in the audience has a different role to play that we need to be cognizant of. So as a point of intrigue, I will leave you with this, that there are a few different models that are not public yet, but if you are interested, we can share with you on an individual basis on exactly how dramatically USAID is rethinking and doing our work.
Right, that's a tease. That's a tease.
Yeah.
Mike.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks everybody for stimulating discussion. I wish we could continue for much longer. A couple of themes that came through to me. First of all, I just want to reiterate, to me, the most powerful force for change on the face of the earth is visibility, knowledge of what's going on, data, the facts. One of the things that struck me from today is we need to do better job and find new ways of gathering that data about what's really going on in different ways besides our conventional data gathering collection apparatus that we use. And that applies to us at Social Progress Index. We have to go directly, ultimately, to individuals and people affected and gather data that way. That's becoming possible. What an incredible world it would be when we had real-time visibility from the actual people involved in all of these societal issues we all care about. So I think that's a major theme. I think if we have this kind of better real-time data, if we can engage directly with the customer, let's call them customers, to provide that visibility, I think that gets us back to what Bill raised, and obviously is a passion of mine, and that is how much can the market actually solve these problems. And again, remember that 20 or 30 years ago, we thought there was massive market failures in the environment. We thought that to improve environmental performance, you had to bear high extra costs. We thought there was a market failure there, that it was profitable for businesses to pollute. Now we've learned it's not profitable to pollute, it's unprofitable to pollute. Because pollution is poor use of resources, bad technology, wasted resources. So what we're finding is lots of what we thought were market failures that caused us to have to sort of intervene and not use the capitalist model. I think those things are falling away. We're finding ways to make efficient, viable markets out of all kinds of things that we never dreamed that we could make a market out of before. So I think, although Darren is absolutely right, there are going to be many issues and many problems where we need to make philanthropic, charitable, and government investments raise the bar, to create certain infrastructure, to create certain circumstances. I think the more we can not give up on market failures as a barrier to being as creative and innovative as we can to deal with as many of these issues as we can, many of which we're talking about today, I think the better off we'll be. So somehow, I think we all in this room hopefully have to come to terms that business can do good.
Yes.
But we got to figure out how to create the architecture of how business can work so that it does do good, not bad. And many of you hopefully will morph into businesses because you will ultimately understand how business models and markets can do good. But that said, we've got to hold this whole enterprise deeply and completely accountable all the time, every day, 24/7, by creating as much visibility as possible of actual results and how people are actually being affected. So it's some combination of those two things that gives me a lot of encouragement for going ahead.
Thank you, Mike. And I just want to close with, I think something you said at the very beginning of your remarks was that point about some of the frustration, the impatience we feel is because we have made progress. The paradigm is shifting, and as it shifts, we become ever more frustrated with the ways that it doesn't fit, that we're not getting the momentum. So I think that's something really positive we should take away. We've got to keep pushing. There's lots of ways we've identified about pushing, about the fact it's about systems, institutions, and power. And this is crucial, but we're starting to get momentum, and we are going to get there, I really believe. Thank you to the wonderful panel. Thank you to the wonderful audience. Everyone online, thank you.